Sullivan from Alaska.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we have a lot of Mr. Chairmans up here.
Mr. Chairman.
And I do think this is a very important gathering of a bipartisan group of senators who are very concerned about this bill. I also serve on the EPW committee, and I serve as the subcommittee chair of the Subcommittee on Waters, Fisheries, and Wildlife. And over recess, we held field hearings in Alaska on this very issue. And a couple things to note, particularly we talked about all the different communities that are going to be impacted. My state actually has 2/3 of the wetlands of the United States in the state of Alaska. For those of you who haven't been in the state of Alaska, with all due respect to my fellow senators here, it's a big state. And estimates of up to half of the waters that would be covered by this rule exist in Alaska. So this is a huge issue for my state, my constituents, and it's not just ranchers and farmers, it's miners, and I want to echo what Senator Donnelly said. One of the biggest problems and what we are doing to address that problem in this legislation is there was no meaningful, serious consultation with the people who are affected. The people, as Senator Donnelly said, care about the water more than anyone, certainly more than the EPA, because we live there. We want to make sure it's clean and pristine, but we also want to make sure it's not over-regulated every single inch of it. So that consultation process didn't take place. That was the #1 thing I heard in my field hearings in Anchorage and Fairbanks. And importantly for me, a whole swath of the state of Alaska, particularly on the North Slope, the tundra, our native groups up there, hugely concerned at the impact that this could have with regard to over-regulating all aspects of our economy there. So I think this is a very important legislation. Looking forward to continuing to work with all the leadership here, and we're off to a good start. Thank you.
We'll open up to questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Senator Sullivan, you directly challenged Jenna McCarthy, the EPA administrator, on the legal underpinnings.
Yeah.
And brought out the point that many disagree that the EPA has the legal authority to do this.
Sure.
It's changing the Clean Water Act. Have you ever gotten, since that Q&A in the EPW hearing, have you gotten a response?
When I asked for their legal opinion on why they have, so my question for those who weren't there to the EPA administrator was there was concern. I think there's, and Senator Heitkamp touched on this, if there's going to be a significant expansion of the jurisdiction of the Clean Water Act, there's one body in the U.S. government that has the authority to do that, and it's not the EPA. It's the U.S. Congress. And that's what I asked the administrator to opine on and see the legal opinion that they supposedly have on this issue, and we have not seen it yet.
So to follow up, do you believe that there is a changing of the Clean Water Act and therefore potential legal violation of the Administrative Procedures Act?
It's not only the Administrative Procedures Act. In my view, it's a separation of powers issue. I was Attorney General in the state of Alaska. It was one of a number of entities. We brought a case against the EPA on regulations that they had with regard to the Clean Air Act. And some of you may have noticed that about a year ago, the Supreme Court came out and essentially in a very strong opinion said to the EPA, you don't have the legal authority to do this. If you are trying to dramatically expand the jurisdiction that you have under the Clean Water Act or the Clean Air Act, you got to go to Congress to get that authority. You can't just do it through a reg. And I think that was clearly stated in a very recent Supreme Court case, and I think it's very analogous in this situation.
Question for Senators Heitkamp and Donnelly. You have spoken about how the EPA has not adequately listened to farmers. The EPA is part of the Obama administration, i.e. is the Obama administration not listening adequately to farmers? My second question is, this is a bipartisan bill. How extensive do you think you can get folks on your side of the aisle to support this bill to actually get it into law?
I'll take the first one. You can take the second one. Look, this is about the EPA, and the more we listen to farmers, the better off we are. The more we listen to our communities, the better off we are. We recently had a program back home in Indiana. One part of it was over in the Fort Wayne area, another part in the South Bend area, where we coordinated with the farm community to try to make the rivers that head into the Great Lakes to keep the sediment in place, to try to reduce the nitrogen level of any of the fertilizers coming across. And working together, we were able to do everything that would have been done if it had been imposed on them. And so my goal is just to try to make sure our voice is heard.
During the budget vote-a-rama, we had a sense of the Senate that was forwarded by Senator Barrasso. We were able to get 6 Democrats to support that. I think that everybody's been waiting to see what this bill looks like, and I think it's a great tribute to the bipartisan nature of this bill, that it is moderate. I think it is a bill that can be advanced and we can get enough support for. Is it going to be the final product? No one can say that. I've been around here long enough to know that everybody's going to want to have a little bit of input. But I think that the way this bill has been written and advanced in a bipartisan way, with compromises already built in during the negotiation that we had when we were writing it, I think people are going to be pleasantly surprised and able to step forward. And so many of my colleagues are very concerned because their constituents are concerned. And I think if the product works, we're going to have the ability to build this out and actually do what Congress ought to do, which is legislate.
Okay, you're right.
Thank you, Senators. I wanted to ask, there's a lot of focus in this bill on looking at streams and including waters with flow. And then there's also a bullet point that talks about looking at and excluding isolated ponds. So and also not looking at waters that are considered jurisdictional on the basis of the presence of migratory birds, which to me reminds me of the Supreme Court case 2001, but I don't see any mention of the significant nexus test or what came about in the Rapanos. Are you all telling the agencies to not consider significant nexus, and are you telling the agencies to look at the metrics of flow as opposed to something that also came up with during the Science Advisory Board meetings?
Yeah, well, as you know, it's still a work in progress. We do have a number. We neglected to share that with you. That's true. And 1140, S1140 is the number of the bill. But we also know there will be a lot of changes and a lot of input, as Heidi mentioned, and so we're waiting for that. In terms of the structure of it, my concern has been, I watched the legislation that came along. I was the one that, and I'll give you names to show that there's meaningful names on here. Tom Buchanan, he's head of the Oklahoma Farm Bureau. He said very early on, the major problems that farmers have in America now is not anything you find, the stuff you find in a lot of the ag bills, but it's the overregulation of the EPA. And of the regulations, and we're talking about endangered species and some of the taxes, the major concern they have of all the regulations is this bill. So I just think there will be some changes made as it goes through the process. We already have a lot of Democrat support, but we're going to get this thing through, because I don't trust the results that I would anticipate would come from one of the regulations out of this administration.
So, sir, are you all going to look at all the Supreme Court rulings, Rapanos and Swank, and?
Yeah, and I think we've already done that. Yes.
Tell us about your plans for moving the bill forward. Is it going to be moving through subcommittee, through committee? Have you secured floor time?
Well, you've noticed that actually we're trying to get back to regular order, to put bills in committees, have hearings, have markups, and then get to the floor with that. I'm not sure the floor time security at this point, when we'll be on the floor, but I would expect that there are going to be hearings followed by, and we've had, obviously this is something that's been discussed in the past, but be a markup, amendments, ways to perfect legislation. As Senator Heitkamp has said, move it through the process. The Senate's getting used to the amendments, but we're seeing more and more amendments. We dealt with a number of amendments just the other day in the EPW committee. We'll be doing the same thing with this, making it better, and then getting it to the floor, and I expect we're going to be able to get it passed.
It sounds like there is enthusiasm and hope that you can reach 60 votes. The President has issued veto threats on this issue in the past. Do you think you can get to 67?
Once the process that John was just describing goes through and people see the moderate nature of this, if you're from one of our types of states, It doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. You look and you go, look, this isn't an extreme piece of legislation. This is a moderate piece of legislation. It's not Republican farmers who are telling me this. It's Republican, Democrat. It's Hoosier farmers who are telling me, look, we need help with this. And so when you look at this, when you see that this is an effort not to zing anybody, but an effort to make the lives of our ag community better, sure, there's no reason we can't hit that number.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Well, what happens if the administration puts out the final rule before this is considered in Congress?
Well, the final rule wouldn't be for another year and a half.
Right.
And I can assure you that we'll have action long before that.
Yeah, we plan to pursue our job and do our job the best we can. And actually, the only date that's actually even been mentioned is what we talked about in our legislation. So,
Yeah, me too. This is going to have to be the last question. Some of us. Yeah.
You guys have talked a lot about the confusion over this in your states, and do you think that some people, just because of the confusion, are overly concerned about what this might do to their property? I mean, as Senator Heitkamp said, the EPA has already said they're not going to do some of these things that you're trying to clarify. Do you think that some of this is just the overall confusion and that people are worried because of a general sense, as Senator Roberts said, that the government is trying to come down on them for so many different things?
We didn't have witnesses come before the Agriculture Committee from virtually every region of the country expressing concern simply to express concern that they're overly worried about this. They're really, truly worried about this. This is not a new issue. This man ought to have about 4 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star and maybe a Silver Star, to boot for the battle. It's his committee. It's his jurisdiction. But we are affected in the agriculture community. And so our committee held a hearing. We set the predicate. People were not jumping up and down, but they were expressing very serious concern. I mean, when they hear 9 senators met with Gina McCarthy before we adjourned last year. And you have 2 lines. Normal farming operations are exempted. Then you have C regs. The regs are the 88 pages that I referred to in the Federal Register. That font is about 8 point. You have to get a magnifying glass to read it. I don't know anybody that can read all that and then try to apply it back to a farm pond, or try to, go back to a dry, creek bed or stream that, has never had water in it. At some point, it had water in it, or the Arkansas River, which is dry, except when it finally gets to Wichita, and then it surfaces up again. If you have some rain and you have some water and you have some runoff, does that apply? I mean, as one farmer told me a long time ago, he said, I am not going to go and try to improve my farm pond to the point that the EPA is trying to tell me that we should have water, clean water, to the level that people can swim in it. I don't think many farmers are waiting after their hard day's work to get in a bathing suit and, canoe around with the critters that are in the farm pond. This is ludicrous. So those kind of stories impact this. Whether or not it would actually come to that, you don't know. But I do know that the state enforcement people who would have the obligation of implementing this bill, they really don't know what those 88 pages mean. And so you're just out there worried about things. And as much as we've had with regulatory overkill, and as long as this issue has been around, it started out as sort of a laugher, Jim. With we were talking about that and said, guess what they did now? Well, if you can't meet with the administrator with 9 senators and you can't have a farm hearing and then you can't have a very good bill supported in a bipartisan way, this is a pretty serious issue. I don't think we're overly concerned.
And we can only hold the room till 11:15, but if you want to contact the EPW committee, we can field any more questions that you have about the details.
And there's not a high comfort level in my farmers in Oklahoma when they hear I'm from the federal government, I'm here to help you. So they look to us, and that's what we're doing.